Okay, let's start. Welcome to the European Showrunner Think Tank, a series of industry events that aim to help to analyze, discuss, and eventually establish a sustainable, truly European approach to showrunning. The event series is one of three pillars of the European Showrunner Program, a unique initiative by IFS International Film School of Köln, founded by the Creative Europe Media Program of the European Union and supported by Focal. My name is Lisa Ambjorn. I'm a Swedish screenwriter and showrunner, working in both Europe and the US. However, it is the first time I'm moderating a talk, so please let me know if I'm doing it wrong. I'm so honored to get to sit down with these legendary storytellers and talk about their brilliant show, The Pitt. And with us, we have R. Scott Gemmill, creator, writer, producer, showrunner. We have Valerie Xu, writer and executive story editor. And we have Uta Breiswitz, director. And today we are going to do a deep dive into the creative collaboration between showrunner, writer, and director. We're going to talk about vision and how it evolves during the process with everyone involved, and what collaborative practices helped make The Pit such a piece of art. And we'll have about 15 minutes in the end for audience questions, so you can write down and send your questions whenever you want. And I'll try to pick out the ones we don't manage to answer during our talk. But I don't want to waste a second, so let's dive right into it. The Pit follows a team of healthcare professionals in a hospital's emergency response department during an intense 15-hour shift, told in real time without music. It was shot chronologically on one location. And these are only some of the things that makes this show so unique. So I will start, Scott. If we talk about the earliest vision of this project, what was there from the beginning in terms of some of these artistic choices?
Well, we knew we were going to do a medical show. We knew it was going to be set in the emergency department. We wanted to set it in a city that we haven't traditionally used a lot in the United States. You are used to seeing shows set in Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Chicago. We wanted to place it in a town or a city that's very much sort of a middle America, what we call blue collar America. And Pittsburgh was a very good example of a town like that, of a city that size. It's a city that struggled. It was at one point the steel capital of, the US, if not maybe the world. And it fell on hard times and is in a process of sort of reinventing itself. We knew it was going to be about a doctor who was suffering from PTSD because COVID was something new in the world of medicine that affected a lot of people, not just the healthcare workers, but they took a brunt of a lot of it because they were on the front lines of the pandemic. And then we wanted it to be very realistic, and one of the ways I knew we could do that was if we didn't have any music. That was a bit of a challenge to convince people that it would work. I knew it would work because I'd written a couple of episodes of ER when had no score. It just takes a certain kind of style of a show. And then we had most of that sort of things in place, but we still felt it needed something different to make it stand apart, to make it different than what we'd done in the past. And because it was going to be on a streamer, we felt it had to have some sort of element that elevated it just that much more. And the idea came around somewhat naturally because a medical shift for the physicians are usually 12 hours. And because streamers are in that realm, it seemed like the best idea was to do 12 hours for 12 episodes. And every episode would be 1 hour the shift. And to be honest, we didn't know, I certainly didn't know if it was going to work until until really I saw the first cut was when I really knew it was going to work. I had a good idea because I'd beaten out an episode in real time, and it seemed like, it might work, but none of us had ever worked in this sort of mode before, so it was a learning experience for all of us. But that in and of itself was very good because it forced us to not go back to what we'd always done and, oh, I've done this before. We were like all now trying to reimagine what this was going to look like and how it was going to work. And we even went so far as to have them design the set blueprints. We have a great production designer, Nina Ruscio, who designed the set so that we could write to it. So I had the set designed so that I could write exactly to the set. And I had a huge map. We all have maps now, but in the beginning, I had a huge map and used post-it notes and little markers for all the doctors and just kept moving them around. So it's like playing a giant board game because it's a lot of coordination. But it was fun, and it worked. And I think what the end result was something pretty cool.
It certainly was. And speaking of that, bringing people on this journey into the vision, those first ideas, and like you say, I think it's brilliant to not be sure if it's going to work because it keeps you on your toes. And I mean, with most shows, you don't know if it's going to work until the
No,
very end, where you have put in all that effort and all the love, and then
right.
you can just, hope for it to work. But when you start to bring in people, then like your set designer or like Valerie and Uta, who we have with us, what were you looking for in the people that you brought into this world and this vision?
Well, it's really about finding people with different voices and different skill sets than your own. And that's really important. I don't really subscribe to the auteur theory of television. I think the best television incorporates the ideas of hundreds of people, and I really encourage people when they come on the show. I mean, the first thing is personality, as long as, am I going to get along with them? Are they going to be easy to work with? Because it is such a collaborative process that you want someone that's going to fit into the family. It's more family than a machine. And so it's really about finding people that are already have proven themselves at a certain skill level, and then whether you like them and whether they share your vision, and once they come on board, you empower them to bring something to the table so that the end product is always greater than any one of us could do on our own.
Hmm. That's great. And Valerie, like coming into the story as a writer and story editor, what was your process when you first stepped into the project? What excited you? What made you maybe worry about?
Yes. So, you know, what was interesting is that when I interviewed for the show, there was not a pilot script. Usually there is in your showrunner meeting as a writer, and there wasn't yet. Scott wrote the first 3 amazing episodes of season 1. So I didn't really have anything to go off of. I kind of went into the meeting. Normally I would say, here's what I love about the characters. I didn't really have any of that. So I remember going into the meeting, and I'm very thorough in my prep, but the only question I kind of had, because that's all I knew, was why Pittsburgh? And we had a lovely short conversation, and I don't know. I think I've told you this, Scott, but I walked out and called my agent, and I said, I didn't get that job. I just definitely didn't get that job. But lo and behold, I was hired. I think what stood out to me about the project once Scott turned in the scripts, and also in conversations with him and the room and Noah early on, was the characters that Scott already had in his mind. He had pitched this to HBO Max even without the script. So the characters were so lived in, and Noah very eloquently says the way Scott pitches is that he doesn't talk about traditional screenwriting is sort of like such and such character 45 years old, and then like some weird adjectives to describe that character. But Scott talks about characters like they're his family or his friends. So I think everybody was just really excited about the variation, the diversity in our cast, which you see on screen, and just the fact that, you know, there were some spaces that were untapped. Like, for example, our Dr. Mel is neurodivergent, and you didn't really see a lot of that on screen. So that's what made me excited about the project. And then just the authenticity. You know, we get a lot of like people coming up to us saying, you know, it's so medically accurate. But it's also the thing I get excited about is we talk a lot in the room about responsible storytelling. And what that means to me is when it comes to a story about race, when it comes to a story about, you know, a gay character or a trans character or a marginalized character, I've been on shows where you don't prioritize telling it the right way. But Scott and, you know, our higher ups all really believe in, we're not going to pick the lowest hanging fruit. We're not going to tell the story in the easiest way. We're going to tell it right in a way that doesn't harmfully perpetuate stereotypes that have been created in film and TV. You know, if we have a disabled character, we're not just going to tell that story the way that it's been done and done harmfully. And that starts from the top. It starts from Scott being willing to fight for that, you know. And, you know, it's a challenge to cast. Like I've talked to disabled friends about how challenging it is to cast in that space, but Scott fights for that. And it all trickles down from the top. And that's what excites me. And that's what I think one of the many things we're proud of is that we don't, I don't know, I call sometimes I call that lazy writing when you just sort of go for the easiest option. It's a harder route to fight for these stories, but I think it's worth it because we've seen the response.
Wow. And also setting that tone, like you're talking so beautifully about, also in the room and in the team, that it's both on screen, but it's also off screen. And that helps staying creatively open to a lot of things that sometimes can just get shut down if the structure in the room is not right. And when you come in as a writer, I'm just speaking from Europe in generally, not always, we do not always have writers' room, for example. When you come in to write episodes and to be a story editor, you're also helping them keeping an eye on the whole scenario, I guess. And you're working with these maps and everything, which also is so cool. Did you have the location very early in the process? I would take it then. Oh, Scott, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, the location is just a set
Oh,
on
yeah.
big stage. Yeah. So we knew we were going to be at Warner Brothers. We knew we were going to be at California. We were trying to get the California tax credit. And, yeah, we're all on. We actually have two stages. We have one stage, which is the main hospital, and then the other stage has the waiting room, part of triage, and a viewing room now.
Mm. Amazing. And Uta, when you were brought into this project, what are you looking for when you step into a director in a project? And what was it that made the Pitt interesting for you?
So first, I have to say that I deserve no credit at all for the first season. I was not there. I was not involved. So if people want to praise it, just leave me out of it. You know, it all goes to Valerie and Scott and everybody else involved. I very much want to second what Scott already said. You kind of check you check the chemistry, you know, and how you can communicate with people and how your energy in the room is received. And similar to Val, I also thought that I completely, you know, like tanked my interview with Scott and John, because I made a joke about French language and who needs French. And then John, because we were talking private stuff and my kids went to a language immersion program where they, learn German. I said like, who needs French, and then John turned to Scott, said like, yeah, Scott, how is your French or something like that. And I think like, oh my gosh, I forgot. And oh my gosh, how arrogant, I just walked out of there and said like, just put your foot in your mouth, like I totally tanked that one. But I was convinced I didn't get it. I was thrilled when I got it, and also just thrilled to hear, like that the show would keep me on as long as they did, as in a producer directing position, because most of my career I had to leave my family. So that was already huge what this show is doing just for filmmakers and people who work in the industry, and especially, people who work in the industry have families and don't want to be separated from their families and their children to keep us at home. Here you are living in Hollywood, but I work all over the country or sometimes in Europe and barely ever in Los Angeles. So this is the first time that it has happened in my career ever, in all these decades, that I got to stay home an entire year, so thank you, Scott. So that's a big thing I want to mention up front, that it's possible. Also, the amazing thing this show does is we basically work 10-hour days or less. It's also unheard of. At the same time, we're shooting like 8 or 9 pages a day. It's completely unheard of. So like technically there were like several things that really attracted me to the show, besides, the fact that it's an amazing show, but also the way it's being produced, which I found very refreshing, because I just come off a show where the touch up between takes of the actors took always twice as long as just doing a take, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as long, So in my meeting, I was told right away there is no touch up before takes. There is no massive hair and makeup. The actors are being just made ready up front in the morning. They come to set and then we just shoot, and they don't leave. And I love that idea, because I love just keeping the energy going, being in the moment, of a performance and not being interrupted constantly. So this was just a concept that just appealed to me tremendously, and then doing it myself, seeing it in practice and how it works and how everybody continues to be engaged, and you really kind of feel like, like you're in this world and you really live the moment, is just incredibly inspiring, to a point when I heard that one of, like our actors, Isa, needed to take her appendix taken out. When I heard about it, I was not on set. I thought to myself, oh, she was at the right place. When she didn't feel well, she was right there. They could have put her on the table, because it feels so real, Yeah, so it's always so interesting to me that, like we all know the hospital genre drama has been around forever and ever and ever and ever. And not that I'm always seek out every new, like network hospital dramas that you have to go through every season that every network seems to have, but that it's possible to completely reinvent a certain genre, but also reinvent the way it's being produced. That I just found genius and so intriguing, yeah. And then, of course, I liked, like Scott, I liked John. Noah was on the Zoom while I interviewed, and I was just keeping my fingers crossed for myself that I could be part of that family. So I'm very grateful that I am.
Wow, amazing and so cool. I was going to move into being on set with this show, but you already done it for me. That is so amazing. It does sound some parts of it. I'm like, oh, that actually sounds European in the way of shooting less each day, having shorter hours because of the regulations, etc. But it does also seem to create this working environment, which just keeps you all very agile and on your toes. You've already touched a little bit on like the regular kind of day of shooting this show. But Valerie, can I just ask you a question? Because I know there's a lot of people listening in who are writers, and a lot of European writers are not used to being on set. Can you just tell me a little bit about how it is when you are on set in a practical sense, but also in a creative sense? Where do you sit? Do you sit by a monitor? Do you walk around? Do you have to do rewrites in the spot?
Yes, and I'm sure Scott also has insight on this as well. So my sort of approach to being on set. And every writer, I think, from the writing process to the filming process, every writer in American TV views themselves as an extension of the showrunner. Scott is very unique in that he really allows us to have our own voices, but traditionally, your job as a writer is to emulate the showrunner's voice. And when you're on set, you are a representative for the showrunner. So I take my job on set very seriously in that regard. I feel that I know what Scott's tastes are, what we've talked about in the room collectively, what's coming down the line in the season, that actors and directors might not always have all of that information. And so I really think of myself as Scott's representative on set. So when I get there, I sit at Video Village with Uta, the director, and the DP. Our DP is JoJo, who's amazing. And I sit there and watch. And I think every writer is a little bit different. My approach is that I tend to be a little bit more flexible if an actor is moving a couple words around, as long as it doesn't change the intention of the scene. Or sometimes, again, they just don't know what's coming down in the season. So I might have a conversation with them about, this is why the scene has to go this way, because in the next episode, your storyline continues for this. But I think that I also love collaborating with the director in that way. I felt like Uta and I had a really good relationship. I never try to talk to an actor on my own. I always try to bring them in, the director in, because it's easier when everyone's on the same page and you have such a short time in between takes to discuss something, that if you're like trying to find Uta or trying to find the group to get together, it's just easier for everybody to understand what's going to change in the scene when you go again. So I am sometimes doing, an adjustment to something on set if geographically we get to that place in the scene and we realize it's kind of awkward. I might need to add some dialogue to kind of get you into the scene so there's not any dead air. Or if an actor is just having a really hard time understanding why they're saying something, we try to get the actors to give notes before we start shooting to prevent any delays if possible. But again, all of this, it's a time-sensitive thing. So you only have a certain amount of time between takes to make an adjustment. But whenever I can, if it's a big enough change, I always text Scott. I always call him. I want to make sure that it's, it's what he envisioned. And if I'm not sure about something, I've texted him. I've said, I don't really know about this part of the scene that I wrote and I hate. And so I'll run it by him and say, is it okay if we cut this piece? But that's my kind of fail-safe, is going to Scott, making sure that, and again, he is so generous with how much flexibility he gives the writers. But I was trained in this very traditional way of just uphold the showrunner's vision. That's really what we're here to do and service, and not in this regimented way. We enjoy doing that because he gave us the gift of creating the characters and the stories.
Wow, and it's so cool to hear you speak about it, because it's also a lot of passion. I think a lot of people think of it as being restricting when we are all trying to collaboratively work towards one vision. And sometimes then obviously you should think about being the kind of voice for the person who has created the show in a sense. But what happens, because I also think with the immense... You do so much research in this show. Before, I know, Scott, you've spoken in other interviews about doing so much research up front, and a lot of the stories that are in the show comes from obviously lived experience of medical workers. But then, Valerie, when you are on set, and if something drastically happens, and this goes for Uta as well, how when you have to do quick drastic changes and you still have to keep that realness, the realism and the authenticity of it, how do you work around that? If it's like we can't get that shot from there, or it doesn't work in the dialogue, we have to get that out, but it might make it less realistic. How do you think about that? How do you process that?
Well, on the medical side, we have a doctor on set for every episode. They are, the lifeblood of this show. So, myself, Uda, Scott, we've gone to the doctor and asked them, like, does this look real? We might want this adjustment for a shot, but obviously we want it to still be medically accurate. On the other fronts, I mean, Uda, you can speak to, whether you've wanted to adjust something because of the way it's being filmed, but I think we really just talk it out. And more often than not, at least on this last episode that Uda and I did together, we found solutions together. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. It does. Uta, from your perspective as a director, you've obviously made your own films, indie, European films, and you worked on all of these different shows with different types of showrunners. How is that for you? Is it restricting your creativity when you are on set? I mean, also it's you have one, like you say, your set. When I speak about being on location, I mean your set in the studio. How do you keep it visually interesting? Do you ever feel like, oh, I want to switch it up, I want to change, I want to get something new? And how do you talk to Scott or Valerie or the people you're with that day?
All good questions. First I want to say something, what you first, like touched on, working with the writers and where is the writer, and also what you asked Valerie. When I was pointing down, I didn't mean to point at you, Scott. I was pointing, when Valerie was asked, where are you? And I was saying, like, usually she's right at my side. That's what I tried to say. Yeah. Because when I started directing, I remember one of my very first jobs, a very well-established director, came up to me, because we were handing over, he just finished the episode and I was the next episode. And he said to me, word of advice, I remember, word of advice, keep your writer as far away from you as possible. And that was very much the sentiment, just 10, 15 years ago, whenever I started directing. And I was thinking to myself right away, and I think I'm very outspoken. I even said it to myself, like, why would I do that? That makes no sense. My writer is my biggest asset, my greatest resource. It takes me into the writer's room. I can have conversations about character arcs and how a certain dramatic moment was found and what's the intention and where it's going. That's so much information for me that I want. I want that creative, feedback in terms of like keeping it fresh, or keeping it interesting. I feel like as an episodic director, you don't come to a show to reinvent the wheel. I always watch all episodes, everything that a show has done. Sometimes I remember one of my early jobs was I got to direct the 100th episode of Weeds, and I had not seen one single episode of Weeds. And I remember I would take my kids to school, and then it was homework, 4 hours or 5 hours or 6 hours before I had to pick my kids up again. I was watching Weeds nonstop in a marathon. And I read the last 3 scripts that were not done yet. And I knew exactly when Marie-Louise Parker would open a door and there was a guy behind the door, I could say, like, I know your storyline exactly. I know what you think right now, and that's important, that you can also play to the unwritten word, the unspoken word, that you really know what's the emotional world, that a character lives in right now. So what I also do, I study what are the stylistic devices that are being used? What is the equipment that's being used? What's the visual language that this show likes? I remember when I was a DP, and on a show, and we were just not having big toys or anything. Many directors would come up and they would say, like, oh, where can I do my 50-foot crane, techno crane shot? And I would humbly say, like, we don't do that on this show. well, I need to get my signature shot in, like I heard that so many times, signature shot, like people, it's something that they wanted to be recognized by. And I was always just rolling my eyes. I do a good job if my episode doesn't stand out visually or tries to be different. Like I need to fit in. That's the style of the show, and it's established and people thought about it. That's what the pilot is for. I hear it so often, like when I was shooting, and I was shooting the pilot as a cinematographer, and then comes the director of the second episode, and very often they have not even watched the pilot, and they would just arrogantly say, I don't care, I do my own thing, I have my own style. And you go like, oh, like you try to establish this visual language that tries to be different, but then the vanity of some directors that come in, like just throws it all out the window. And I always felt like vanity always, like destroys creativity, destroys, teamwork, and usually doesn't make people better. They make them worse as with their work. So I don't go there and say like, how can I spice it up? Like if anything at all, it looks pretty straightforward, but the Pit has a rather, I would say, challenging visual language because it's all about the perspective of the physicians, and the caretakers, like, and you never really put the camera into the POV of the patients, we experience this world through our physicians, through our, healthcare workers, and so it has happened to me a couple of times early on where I felt like, okay, let's put the camera over here, and Jojo, our great DP, would say like, no, we don't do that, like I'm thinking like, isn't that straightforward coverage? How can I look the other way? Well, we don't take the camera there, you have to anchor it around a healthcare worker, like, so it was more complicated than one would think to shoot the show, even though then you have this documentary feel to it and you follow your characters, which is always very exciting. But getting there, took a second to rewire your brain. Let's put it that way.
But that's amazing. I mean, Scott, it sounds like your whole team, everyone in their each role can take ownership of the DNA of the show, which is amazing. I mean, like you were saying, no, we don't shoot it that way. Someone can tell you that you're the director of this episode, and everyone feel ownership in their position and take care of the story, which is just beautiful. And you also work. You have Noah Weiler who plays Robbie, the main character. I mean, it's an ensemble piece, of course. And Scott, you have worked with him obviously for the entirety of ER. Now you're working with him again. He's also directing and writing on The Pit. I mean, you must be very synchronized in your way of working, but how is it to have an actor in the writer's room, for example, and who
Oh,
you can
good.
bring on set and do the whole journey with?
I think it's great. I think all writers should do some acting. I think all writers should do some editing and do some directing. It makes you a better writer, because actors have a different approach to the material. They always have an agenda within every scene, or they should have if they're a good actor. And once you start to think like that, you helps you as a writer because you write like that for the characters, so that all the characters also have an agenda in the scene. So everyone's not just standing there providing exposition. They have a story and a journey of their own, and that's ultimately where you get conflict, and that's where you get drama, and that's the comedy is just drama with a sort of a comedic bent. Um, yeah, I think it's really important, and letting everyone have a piece of ownership is how we end up with something that is so special, I think.
Mm. Oh, really? And because you're not on set all the time, I take it from hearing Valerie speak.
No, I grew up in a very different. I grew up in Canada, and worked in Canada before I came to the U.S. in as a writer, and the system in Canada was very much European in the sense that the writers, you had very few writers on a show. Writers were never really on the set. You could visit, but you weren't expected to be there. Having writers on the set was not even something we did on ER. but it's a new thing. But having Noah in the room is special, not because he's also an actor, but he's also the one who's carrying the whole show on his shoulders. So he has great insight. He's there all the time because I'm not on the set all the time. And to be honest, I get really bored really fast on the set. So I visit multiple times a day, but I do a lot of Irish goodbyes and just sort of sneak out whenever I can. Although yesterday I did walk into a shot and blew a whole take, so even I make mistakes sometimes. But yeah, no, it's great. Having Noah in the room is great, and having, being able to see things from both a director's point of view and as a writer's point of view and as an actor's point of view is very helpful in the room. And we have a great relationship in terms of working together. So it works very, very well.
And when you move into post-production, Uta, you are editing your episodes. I mean, the classical show running system, I guess you would have a certain amount of time with the episode, and then Scott, you take over. How do you work around that?
Yeah, the director gets so many days to finish his cut, or the editor. Then the director gets so many days to finish her cut or their cut, and then it comes to the producers. That's when we, do any final changes. A lot of times that may be where we tighten it, sometimes things have been overwritten and the directors, are doing their due diligence and they'll shoot all of it, even though they probably know while they're shooting it that it's too much. And then we have to come in and suck some of the air out of it, cut it to time or if things aren't working or, you know, what everything you deal with from reflections to mismatches to whatever that can't be helped, or occasionally we'll decide we need to drop a scene, or we every now and then we'll have to add a scene. So that's that process, and then it goes to the studio network. They give any notes they have. We do those. Then we do spotting. We do the mix. Just like any other production.
And you're all in contact with the director throughout this process, with the writer as well. Valerie, do you watch any of the edits or?
Yeah, another generous Scott move is that yes, the writer does get to be in and observe during post. I That's an area where I'm still learning. So it's the place that I enjoy my time on set, but I also really enjoy the time in post because I'm learning so much. It's the area I have least experience in. But I just wanted to also jump in and explain, because it might help with context. Part of the reason Scott, it's also a matter of unable to be on set because he has so many things going on. And I came up as a showrunner's assistant. So my job was to sort of know when my boss needed to be in post, when they needed to swing by set, when they needed to be in the room. Our writer's room is still going during production. So he's getting pulled in so many different directions. And I think it's I can speak for the writers. It's our honor to sort of hopefully take some of those responsibilities off his plate because he's doing so much. And maybe that's a little bit different from the European system, because the American system really, the showrunner from start to finish, they are responsible for overseeing all of those processes. So on any given day, he has to be in post, or he has to be in a production meeting, or he has to be in the writer's room. And he kind of deploys his staff wherever they need to be.
Mm. But I mean, it sounds just amazing listening to all of you, because I think there is this original previous how TV worked when it was from an actual broadcaster. Is that the right term? And then you have networks now. I always get those mixed up. I guess there was a very clear structure in how to do these things, and then when with Max and Netflix and everything came along, it changed a lot in the US industry as well. And it sounds a bit like you have kind of reinvented the American showrunning system in a way that works for you in this show, which is very cool. And I'm just gonna start throwing in some of the questions that's coming through in the chat. This one is, how does the Pitt's unique real-time format affects the collaboration between writing, directing, and showrunning? And how much of the visual storytelling is defined in the script? Maybe Scott, maybe you can touch on that. I mean, it does sound like you did so much research and had so many
Yeah.
things in place already.
Yeah, I mean, everything from even the design of the hospital, Nina, who designed it, studied hospital design to come up with our design, you know. I mean, that's a real thing. Um, in terms of the real time, in terms of how it affects things, it's really just learning to write in real time so that there's continuity between your scenes and the stories you are telling are are realistic for that hour's worth of duration, you know? So it's in some ways it's like slowing down your storytelling, but you're also accelerating it at the same way because you're in that real time, so you're not making breaks away and shortening time or elongating time. So it's its own unique little experiment, I
Mm.
guess. You know, and I think we're still learning. I mean, the learning process isn't over yet. I think we're still learning how some things works and how some things don't.
Yeah, and are there any things that you learned in season one that then you have now adapted to in season two?
Just in terms of how we handle some of the handoffs, how things work, how quickly things work, um, which rooms are a little tight and, you know, to work in. We had to rebuild one of our rooms to make it bigger. We added some hallways just to give us a little more, you know, just to make things more efficient. And that's just through trial and error.
Yeah. And because I know that you had a kind of a boot camp for your actors before you started shooting, where they learned a lot of medical skills. So they are actually very good in the aspect of knowing how to do a lot of these things that has to be really realistic. Do you also do rehearsals on the scene? I know because you shoot uh, like the scenes you're doing in the right order. I also know that Noah was talking in an interview about you kind of come in on set in the morning and then you know that we're in episode 10. I'm really tired. There's already been, 10 hours, so I have to kind of adapt to that. Um, yeah, talk a little bit about how to prepare the writers or the actors for the scenarios you
Yeah.
throw them in.
So we do the boot camp and then they're given all the pronunciations, you know, and sometimes given the pronunciations on as audio recording so they can hear them being spoken as well as see them being written phonetically. And then, yeah, we rehearse the big trauma scene. I mean, we rehearse every scene, of course, but the big trauma scenes are sometimes even rehearsed, if possible, a day before or whenever we have a moment, sometime while something else is being shot. And what happens in those scenarios is the doctor who's on set. So there's always a real doctor on set every day. And we also have a lot of our background nurses are real nurses, and so they're very, very good at doing what they're doing is in some cases what they do. Some of them are still practicing, and as are our doctors. And so what the doctors will do is they'll take it in, they'll break everybody around the gurney and show them everything that will happen with the technique. and rehearse it. What person is opening what person is cleaning what person is opening, cutting open the chest. And then once they get it all, and we do it, show them all the moves, then we do it at like half speed, then we do it a little bit faster, and then we bring in the cameras to see where they can find it, and the director works with the DP and the operators to find the best way to capture what is already there, not the other way around. So that's why the medicine, we never really adjust the medicine to fit the shooting. It's always usually the other way around.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it does that. That's why it feels so authentic. I even had to ask my Swedish friend who's a nurse if it was realistic, and she was like, "Yeah, very. That's why I can't watch it because it's just everyday work." But I mean, because it is like art imitates life in your process, and when okay, so I have so many questions. That's why I stopped. My brain is just like, you have to ask this, you have to remember this. Um, okay, sorry. Uh, was there a list of emergencies and specific medical treatments beforehand? I guess before you started writing, and did the writers decide which cases would fit in which episodes in the series? So just
Yeah.
research wise, a lot of the stories there is violence towards medical workers. There's also their own personal relationship with different medical treatments in the show while they're helping others. How did you balance that?
Yeah, there's two sort of approaches. One is, just bringing in a whole list. I made a list of a couple hundred maybe of things I thought about, and everyone else brought in, brings in stories they think about. So
Mm.
we have there's medicine, so we have all these things floating around that we might tell these stories, but the stories are always, the medicine is always really being driven by the personal stories of the doctors, essentially. There's what's going on with the doctors, what's going on with the doctors internally, what's going on with the doctors uh, between the doctors and the other staff, and what's going on with the doctors, between the doctors and the patient. And so that story becomes the important thing. And then sometimes we find the medicine to fit that, or we find a medical story that we really like and find whose story does this fit, and what is the story we want to tell while we're talking about whether it's a sexual assault or human trafficking or failure to get vaccinated, etc. So it's the stories. We always say, when we do a big medical scene, the essence is, what else is it about? What's it really about in this scene? Where is the conflict, and who is having it? Is it internal? Is it between doctors? Is it between the doctors and the patient? Um, is it the environment that's giving them, trouble? That's part of what happens in this season. Our hospital environment itself sort of turns on people. So it's always finding those sources of conflict, but that are that are that are part of that human struggle and the human condition, and then finding the medicine to support it.
Yeah, and you also have a very medical lingo throughout the show. Yes, you have some people who are new in the hospital in the sense that they are starting their doctor careers. That you can use a little bit to explain some of the things that's happening, but you also do let a lot of the medical lingo just be as it is, and it's not explained to the audience. Was that something that Max HBO like that you agreed with from the beginning, or was that
No,
something that you had to work with?
I think that's something we had to work with. They're still a network, and there was so they worry, I think more so than we do. I think we take chances, and we have to convince them sometimes just to trust. the process. And so, yes, they were worried that if the audience didn't know the medical terms, they wouldn't know what's going on. And our argument was, do you know what's going on when you go to the ER? You know, you don't. Unless the doctor explains it to you, you don't know what the hell's going on. So, and if you want to have the full experience of what it's like to be in the ER, then this is what it's like. And if you understand what they're saying, that's great. But if you don't, well, that's too bad. That's what it is.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm actually getting a question about that. So I'm really happy you answered it because it's someone saying they basically develop a show and there's a constant request for making subtext into text, usually via action lines. Do you find yourself writing this way nowadays? And if so, how do you manage it? And I think you actually managed to answer that. I mean, obviously you have your name to the project. I think it's coming from your career with what you have created before, obviously maybe there's a easier way to uh, make the network understand a little bit,
A little bit.
a little bit,
Maybe this
a tiny
bitch.
bit. But it is hard, and I guess it's also in this kind of TV that we're having like right now where they want to over explain everything and people should be able to kind of watch it with their phone in the hands and we obviously all try to work against that.
Well,
um
we threw a lot at them at once. You know, it was no music, a lot of gore. You're not going to know what they're talking about. It's going to be real time. So, they were like, "Whoa, whoa, let's one new thing is usually enough." So you put too many new things, they get a little nervous. But to their credit, they stuck by us and they, you know, tentatively trusted us, and I think we've come to a really good working arrangement where, we trust each other now.
Yeah, and you did also say earlier that what you could show was the episodes of ER where you didn't have music, as a kind of an example of how it could work without it. So I guess that's also a good advice to people to look for the actual
Right.
good references that are out there for these kind of things. And I know what you're saying. It's like obviously a lot with these shows. Now I'm hearing from all Swedish streamers are, oh, where is our the Pitt? And you're like, you would never dare to do that show. So if we would have come with this to you, you would have said no. Uh,
That is the story of every writer in the history of writing. I mean, until somebody else does it, nobody wants to do it. And we were just lucky that they let us be the first people to try and do it. And so my hats are off to them.
that's a great way to look at it, and I also I agree. I have a question. Was there an intimate coordinator or several on set?
Always, yeah,
Intimacy, yeah,
almost
yeah.
always.
So,
Yep, almost always. Yep. Very important.
uh, how did the city receive the series?
Oh, Pittsburgh?
Mm.
Oh, very, very well. Even to the point where their hockey team, their national hockey team, did like a spoof of our show for the NHL for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So that was pretty cool. No,
Wow.
they treat us so well, and it's a great city, and it's a wonderful place to shoot.
And like you were saying, it made it unique because not a lot of shows are set there. So
Yeah,
it's also good for, there's a lot of places in Europe which we haven't seen on screen. It's time to get them up there.
yeah. Every
Um,
place has a story.
we have a more specific question about a specific part of the narrative shift in the story. Can you tell us a bit more about the shift in the last four episodes, introducing many new characters while working towards the end of character arcs for the regulars, while keeping up the fast pace during the major traumatic event of the shooting? Spoiler for everyone. How did you handle that? Also, more importantly, do Robbie and Collins end up together in season two? Which you will obviously all answer.
Um, well, originally the show was pitched as 12 episodes, so it originally would not have had those extra episodes. So, but HBO Max wanted 15, so we had to extend what would normally be a shift. that was extended through the mass casualty. So, but at the same time, the reality and trying to stick to reality is that the night shift would be coming on. So we had to do both. And in reality, if a mass casualty happened, the night shift and everyone else comes anyways. They come to help out to the point where they, in some of these situations, fortunately, Europe doesn't have a lot of them, but they do in the United States. Um, they get so many people coming into the hospital to help out that they have to turn doctors and nurses away because everyone wants to be a part of it. So that sort of extended it, and so we just had to, introduce these new characters as well as we did, and also as efficiently and as quickly because we didn't have a lot of time to spend getting to know them. But that is one of the things about the genre or this format is that there is the real time is a blessing and a curse. You only have so much time to introduce this person, but then on the other hand, you have to be very precise and quick. And then once you're done, you move on and you get on with the story. So, and no one, you don't get bogged down in details because you don't have the luxury of just getting lost with personal stuff, because it's bam, 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 bam.
Mm. Well, yeah, and we are slowly running out of time. I could talk to all of you for a full day, 3 weeks. There are a few more questions. I'm going to try to kind of weave them into a little send off. I would like to ask you actually what you think your most important prep in terms of taking the vision from the pre-production as a director, as a writer, as a showrunner, that you do to kind of keep the vision going when you're on set and when you are later in post-production. Is it the talking between amongst yourself? Is it the trying to how do you try to nail the vision together to keep it intact through all the changes that inevitably happen? Easy one.
I think it's through communication and um, spending the initial early time working together on the set design, the set colors, the lighting, working with JoJo, working with John, working Noah and I, and bringing in Dr. Joe Sachs, who, is a consultant and is a writer and executive producer, and just really working on what color are our scrubs going to be, what is the texture of the floor going to look like. You can put all that stuff goes into it, and then JoJo does some shooting tests, and we do mood boards, and we talk about sound design and all those, all the things that come into it, so that by the time you go to shoot, we've all talked about it. We have a sort of a collective vision, and with each passing, episode, we get better, and it coalesces more and more because you also have to get to know the set. That takes time. You have to get to know the actors. You have to get to know the rhythm of the camera operators. So it's just a process. But yeah, by keeping it very communicative, and
And
I think.
open. I mean, it sounds like everyone is invited into that, and there is no kind of holding on to your core ideas, but letting them out in the open and talking about them and discussing them. I think Uta, do you wanna add to that?
Yeah, for me, like being one of the, a couple of episodic directors, and since we shoot everything in order, for me, the best resource, of course, I read the scripts that are in between before, like I direct the next script. But for me, the best resource is, like watching the dailies. So you'll find me a lot sitting in my office and I'm just watching the dailies and, what the other director has done, how he or she has shot it, but most importantly, see the performances, you know. So I know exactly where a character left off emotionally and where I'm picking it up because I literally pick it up the next moment, you know, and how upset they were, where their mind is at. And once I see it, it's really, it's way more memorable for me that I can access it way more than just reading it. So I need to see it because that way I also felt it and I'm more with them. And that really helps me to, you know, guide them better on their journey. And we, you know, like Valerie and I made like slight changes on our, you know, on our script from where we picked it up because we saw that one character already very, very emotional, you know, at the end of the episode before us, that we just decided the journey needs to end somewhere else now. She cannot continue this way, you know. Yeah, the dailies are for me the most important tool to tie it all together as an episodic director. Yeah.
Wow. We are running out of time. We're out of time. There's no more time. You are all so amazing. Thank you so much for letting us in to you in your brains, in your process. It's very inspiring, and I think everyone can take away so many things from this talk. I think hearing about how a showrunner system can work in the favor for everyone, keeping everyone on their best creative, most exciting, most adventurous tippy toes is just brilliant, and it's what we all want to do. It's the kind of projects we all want to be part of. So thank you so much for inspiring us and yeah, just teaching us everything. We are so excited about season 2. So go and make it, and
Yeah.
remember that Europe, the filmmakers of Europe, are rooting for you.
Oh, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much, everyone.